Imagine looking down at your phone because the emergency air raid siren just went off in your neighborhood.
Right, a terrifying scenario.
Exactly. You are checking for the nearest shelter. But at that exact second, the alert itself delivers state-sponsored spyware that immediately drains your data, tracks your location, and blinds local communications.
The threat is literally in your hand.
It is. The missiles are no longer just in the sky above you, they are inside the device you're holding. Good morning. You are joining us for today's intelligence briefing. It is Thursday, April 2, 2026.
Good morning.
We are tracking a rapidly evolving security environment. It's a situation where regional conflict in the Middle East has, well, forcefully intersected with international diplomatic maneuvering, severe global economic shifts, and domestic political developments. This briefing will provide a comprehensive, objective analysis of these interconnected events.
And today's briefing is brought to you by ProWave AI. This deep dive has actually been generated by Stylo News, an AI-powered news application.
Yes, and the mission for today's deep dive is titled Iran Conflict, Missiles, Drones, Cyber, and the Strait of Hormuz.
For your context, we are evaluating a stack of intelligence assessments from late March 2026. These cover military, cyber, economic, and geopolitical developments.
And it is essential to understand what Stylo News actually is before we begin.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. So this is the consumer-facing version of Stylo Intel Ops. Historically, that platform has been reserved strictly for enterprise, government, and military operations.
Wow, so listeners are getting high-level access.
Exactly. You are utilizing a tool specifically designed to support global decision makers. The objective today is to impartially identify the primary patterns over the past 2 weeks, outline the perspectives of key leaders, and forecast possible courses of action.
Right, and we will analyze the data without generating fear or political bias, just the facts. So looking at the physical escalation over the past 2 weeks, a distinct pattern emerges. Those 1,900 drones we have seen in the sky aren't just flying blind. Their success relies entirely on a calculated strategy.
Yeah, there hasn't been a single massive retaliatory strike.
Right. Instead, Iran has launched a sustained campaign of coordinated waves utilizing ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and unmanned drones. To grasp the sheer scale, air defense systems in the United Arab Emirates alone have intercepted over 1,900 drones and more than 400 ballistic missiles.
The volume is staggering, truly. But the geographic expansion of these targets requires closer analysis. The target list has diversified far beyond Israeli territory, cities like Jerusalem, Haifa, and Beersheba.
It's spreading significantly.
It is. Direct strikes are now hitting Gulf state infrastructure. The Alba and EGA aluminum plants in Bahrain and the UAE have sustained attacks.
And they aren't just hitting industrial targets.
No, furthermore, the strikes systematically target United States military enablers. They are going after AACS, which are airborne warning and control systems, as well as air tankers and major installations like the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia and Al Dhafra in the UAE.
Let's clarify what targeting those enablers actually means. An AACS isn't just a plane. It is essentially the quarterback of the sky, right?
That's a perfect way to describe it.
It's a massive radar system that spots incoming threats and tells the defense systems exactly where to fire. If you blind the quarterback, the entire layered defense architecture is suddenly compromised.
That is the exact tactical logic. If you degrade the radar and communication nodes, the incoming physical weapons have a much, much higher probability of reaching their targets.
And there has been a major strategic shift in their reach that caught my attention in these reports.
Oh, the Diego Garcia launch.
Yes, exactly. They launched long-range ballistic missiles toward the U.S. and U.K. military base on Diego Garcia, located deep in the Indian Ocean. That launch demonstrated a 4,000-kilometer range.
Which is a massive escalation.
It really is. Suddenly, parts of Europe, specifically Kosovo, which currently hosts the U.S. Bond Steel base, are sitting well within the threat radius.
You see, Iran previously adhered to a self-imposed 2,000-kilometer limit on its ballistic missiles. Doubling that range unilaterally shatters the existing security calculus for NATO's eastern and southeastern flanks.
It changes everything.
It does. It is a deliberate demonstration that their offensive envelope has fundamentally expanded.
So, looking at this mix of cheap drones and highly advanced long-range weaponry, is this essentially a boxing strategy?
How do you mean?
Well, it feels like they're throwing rapid, lightweight jabs to thousands of cheap drones purely to exhaust the opponent's energy and deplete those multi-million-dollar air defense interceptors. All of that just clears the path for the heavy right hook, which would be the heavier ballistic missiles.
The boxing comparison is a helpful visual, absolutely. But let's look at the mathematics behind it. In military intelligence, this is known as a saturation and leakage strategy.
Situation linkage. Okay.
Right. You saturate the airspace with inexpensive drones costing maybe $20,000 each to overwhelm radar and consume interceptor missiles that cost upwards of $2 million each.
Wow, the cost disparity is wild.
It is. The goal isn't for every drone to hit a target. The goal is to mathematically stress the defense grid until a percentage of the heavier, far more destructive ballistic missiles inevitably leak through the exhausted shield.
But to pull off a saturation strike of that magnitude, you need to create blind spots. And that is where the physical war relies entirely on the digital one.
The cyber vanguard, exactly.
The cyber warfare aspect is unfolding at the exact same time, acting as a highly coordinated vanguard.
We have tracked sustained operations by a pro-Iranian group known as the Handala Hack Team. Their operations are aggressive, and they target high-level individuals.
Right, like the FBI breach.
Yes. Recently, they successfully breached the personal email and photos of FBI Director Kash Patel.
Why go after personal photos during a kinetic missile conflict, though? That seems disconnected from the battlefield.
Well, it serves two purposes: psychological warfare and leverage. By compromising the highest levels of federal law enforcement, the adversary projects an image of total access, undermining domestic confidence.
That makes sense. It creates panic.
Exactly. It also opens avenues for coercion or blackmail against key decision-makers during a crisis.
And the tactical synchronization they are using against civilians is chilling. During the physical missile strikes on Israel, spyware was delivered to Israelis via text messages.
Weaponizing the alerts.
Yes, they actively exploited the emergency alert systems. So an air raid siren goes off, human survival instinct dictates you immediately check your phone for a government shelter warning, and at that exact millisecond, you download a payload giving state actors real-time access to your personal device.
It literally weaponizes a population's instinct for self-preservation, and the intelligence shows they aren't just going after data on phones, they are actively targeting physical logistics.
Right, the healthcare supply chains.
Correct. They breached U.S. healthcare supply chains, specifically targeting Stryker, a major medical technology company based in Michigan.
I have to admit, I'm confused by how we usually categorize this. Do we need to stop viewing cyber warfare as this separate, invisible theater of hackers in basements?
Yes, absolutely.
Because based on these reports, it isn't separate theater at all. It is a direct, synchronized component of the physical strike package. It is a digital vanguard meant to blind the adversary and sow domestic panic right before the physical missiles land.
The separation between digital and physical warfare no longer exists. They are two halves of the same spear.
Two halves of the same spear.
Wow. And what is accelerating the synchronization is artificial intelligence. State-aligned actors are utilizing AI to coordinate spyware distribution, launch hyper-realistic disinformation campaigns, and scan air defense networks for vulnerabilities at a speed that human operators just cannot match.
To sustain these massive, simultaneous physical and digital campaigns, a nation needs immense capital. War is incredibly expensive.
It is the financial engine of conflict.
Which leads to the economic warfare aspect. How is Iran funding thousands of drones, ballistic missiles, and an army of AI-assisted hackers while operating under one of the most severe global sanctions regimes in modern history?
The intelligence points directly to their oil lifeline, which has proven remarkably resilient. Despite the heavy military pressure and the effective blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which continues to disrupt global shipping, Iran has managed to nearly double its daily oil revenue.
Wait, double it? How is that mechanically possible with international navies patrolling those waters and strict sanctions in place?
It is facilitated almost entirely by China, which purchases over 90% of Iranian oil. They achieve this not through traditional open market channels, but by utilizing a massive fleet of small independent refineries.
And these involve those ship-to-ship transfers, right?
Yes, complex ship-to-ship transfers at sea.
So they are taking massive oil tankers out into the ocean, turning off their transponders so they disappear from tracking systems, and literally pumping millions of barrels of crude oil through hoses to completely different ships.
That is exactly the mechanism. Once the oil is transferred to the shadow fleet, the origin documents are systematically falsified to make it look like it came from a non-sanctioned country.
It's essentially money laundering for oil.
Precisely. The financial transactions are then cleared through a highly sophisticated network of shadow banking that completely bypasses the U.S. dollar and international financial clearinghouses.
The global economic fallout from this shadow economy and the physical strikes is already hitting the listener's wallet. Those attacks on the Gulf aluminum smelters in Bahrain and the UAE.
The Alba and EGA plants.
Right. When those facilities go offline, the global supply of aluminum drops instantly. Consequently, global aluminum prices have surged.
Which impacts everything.
Exactly. That means everything from the cost of manufacturing your next car to the price of a soda can is going up, driving global inflation. Over in Europe, consumer and business confidence is plummeting, particularly in Germany's heavy industrial sector.
And we must factor in the financial burn rate for the United States military. The U.S. is currently spending an estimated $1.3 million per minute to maintain its defensive posture and operations in the region.
1.3 million a minute. That's astronomical.
It is. Early projections suggest the long-term costs of this conflict could easily exceed $1 trillion.
It's like the global sanctions regime is a massive concrete dam trying to hold back a reservoir of water. But this Chinese shadow banking network and the ship-to-ship transfers act as a structural leak at the base of the dam, keeping the Iranian military machine fully pressurized with capital.
It is a strong visual, but let's adjust it to reflect the reality of the intelligence. China isn't just a passive leak at the base of the dam. They have actively constructed a massive parallel bypass canal.
A parallel bypass canal, I see.
Yeah, you can build the strongest sanctions dam in the world, but if the second largest global economy acts as the bypass, the pressure will not only be maintained, it will increase.
All of this extreme financial and military strain is fundamentally fracturing alliances and stoking domestic unrest across the globe.
The geopolitical ripple effects.
Exactly. Reporting factually on the U.S. domestic climate, there is significant public friction. Widespread No Kings protests are actively erupting across the United States.
Driven by recent administrative policies.
Yes, these demonstrations are driven by opposition to President Trump's administration policies, specifically his recent directives to deploy IC agents to commercial airports to enforce immigration measures.
That domestic friction extends internationally into the core of the NATO alliance. President Trump has publicly criticized European allies, asserting they're refusing to adequately assist in securing the Strait of Hormuz.
And that triggered a pretty strong response, didn't it?
It did. Following this critique, U.S. Secretary of State Rubio issued a stark public warning that a United States troop withdrawal from the region would effectively mean the end of the NATO alliance entirely.
And the European allies are reacting to that rhetoric. Finland is actively conducting a strict audit of U.S. weapon deliveries.
Which is a clear signal of mistrust.
It is. Meanwhile, the broader European bloc remains highly cautious. They're extremely hesitant to commit resources or get entangled in a widened Middle East conflict, especially with the ongoing war in Ukraine already straining their military stockpiles and economies.
It exposes a severe divergence in strategic priorities. The U.S. is focused on immediate military deterrence and projecting power in the Gulf, while Europe is highly focused on its own economic stability and the immediate physical threat on its eastern border with Russia.
Which brings us to a sudden and somewhat paradoxical diplomatic development reported in the briefs. President Trump announced a 15-point negotiated agreement.
The proposed framework.
Right. Under this proposed framework, Iran commits to never developing nuclear weapons. In exchange, the U.S. initiated a 5-day pause on all military strikes targeting Iranian energy infrastructure.
While the U.S. announced this framework, the intelligence reveals a complication. Iranian officials have officially and publicly denied that these direct talks are even taking place.
Wait, I need to question the optimism of this diplomatic narrative. Trump is announcing a 15-point peace deal and halting strikes, but at the same time, we have reports from Human Rights Watch stating that the IRGC is actively escalating recruitment.
The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Right, which is the primary branch of the Iranian armed forces.
Mm-hmm.
They're actively escalating the recruitment of 12-year-old children to serve in military logistics and border patrols. Those two realities cannot coexist. A nation preparing for peace does not conscript children.
It is a glaring contradiction, and it requires careful analysis of state behavior. What we are observing is a stark divergence between international diplomatic signaling and ground-level regime survival tactics.
So they are sending mixed messages on purpose.
Exactly. The diplomatic channels, whether officially acknowledged or publicly denied, are frequently utilized to buy time, secure strike pauses, and relieve immediate kinetic pressure on critical infrastructure.
So the negotiations are a shield.
Often, yes. The mobilization of child logistics networks, however, indicates a deep, long-term militarization of the society. It suggests the regime is preparing its populace for a protracted, existential, multi-generational struggle, regardless of the concessions being discussed at the negotiating table.
So how is all of this landing in the information space? How are the public and global decision makers actually processing these overlapping crises?
Well, we have analyzed the global sentiment across platforms like X, tracking high-volume hashtags such as hashtag Strait of Hormuz and hashtag Iran War.
What does the data show?
The data reveals a deeply fractured global public. Sentiment in Europe and within United Nations channels leans heavily toward immediate diplomatic de-escalation and restraint. In the United States, the sentiment is highly polarized, fracturing almost entirely along pre-existing domestic political lines.
And what about the Iranian perspective?
Conversely, Iranian-linked social media sentiment remains highly defiant, projecting strategic strength and broad readiness for a larger, sustained war.
And these geopolitical ripples are pushing far beyond the Middle East and Europe. We are seeing them destabilize parts of South Asia.
Right, the situation in Bangladesh.
Yes, in Bangladesh, the new Prime Minister, Tariq Rahman, is actively working to improve diplomatic and economic ties with India. But at the exact same time, Pakistani religious figures are traveling into Bangladesh. The intelligence indicates this movement is raising localized security concerns and potentially inciting sectarian friction in highly sensitive border areas.
It demonstrates the fragility of the global system. Regional instability in the Gulf can quickly export itself, agitating historical fault lines and sparking secondary conflicts in entirely different hemispheres.
Taking all of this intelligence into account, the drone waves, the cyber vanguard, the shadow economy, and the fractured diplomacy, what are the primary courses of action that listeners should be watching for in the coming days?
Based on the pattern analysis, there are three main trajectories to monitor closely. First, expect a continuation of calibrated episodic strikes. These are designed for political messaging and probing layered defenses rather than initiating a total, unrestrained regional war.
Okay, so a continuation of the current physical strikes. What's the second?
Second, closely watch the expiration of the 5-day U.S. strike pause. The critical variable is whether this proposed 15-point agreement materializes into verifiable physical de-escalation or if heavy hostilities resume.
And the cyber element.
That's the third trajectory. Anticipate further asymmetric cyber attacks. We will likely see increased attempts to disrupt critical infrastructure, global supply chains, and emergency response networks, utilizing that digital vanguard strategy.
A quick question regarding the information space data we just reviewed. Are these social media platforms merely reflecting the public's natural anxiety, or are they actively being utilized by state actors to shape the very courses of action we just outlined?
The intelligence overwhelmingly points to the latter. It is a continuous, weaponized feedback loop. State actors utilize AI-driven disinformation and targeted sentiment campaigns not just to gauge public reaction, but to actively engineer it.
So they are actively manipulating the global mood.
Absolutely. They flood the zone to degrade the political will of their adversaries, amplify domestic protests, and build internal support for their own escalation strategies. The information space is now a theater of war as vital and contested as the Strait of Hormuz itself.
To conclude today's intelligence brief, it is evident that we are navigating a highly interconnected threat landscape. The kinetic waves of missiles, the vanguard of cyber warfare targeting personal devices, and the underlying shadow economy are not isolated events.
No, they are the synchronized elements of a massive global strategic realignment.
And the decisions made by global leaders in the coming days regarding diplomatic frameworks, military deployments, and the cohesion of international alliances will carry profound, long-lasting implications for global security and economic stability. For those of you relying on this data to understand the shifting landscape, we want to remind you that this deep dive was generated by Stylo News. It is a mobile and computer application that allows you to download and deeply customize your own personal intelligence-style briefs.
Highly recommend it for staying ahead of these fast-moving events.
Exactly. The system aggregates real-time data from hundreds of traditional news sources, as well as direct updates from X. If you want AI-powered news on demand tailored to your specific needs, you can subscribe right now by visiting www.stylonews.com.
It's an invaluable tool.
Okay, dropping the formal news anchor persona for a second. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We really appreciate you taking the time to unpack all of this heavy material with us.
That's a lot to process, for sure.
It really is. If there is a specific topic, region, or developing story you want us to cover in the future, please let us know. You can request new topics and follow Stylo News on all your favorite social media platforms.
It's been a fascinating, if sobering, discussion today. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, unresolved thought to ponder on your own.
Let's hear it.
We've spent a lot of time today discussing how human decision makers are utilizing AI to accelerate cyber warfare, generate deepfakes, and analyze intelligence. But as these automated systems become exponentially faster than human comprehension, you have to wonder, how long until the algorithms aren't just advising the generals on target selection, but are actually authorized to pull the digital trigger themselves?